I'm so glad everybody can be here. We've got dignitaries from various places. I see Mayor Rogan from Lyons. I see our county commissioner, Jody Shattuck McNally, the media. So glad that you're here covering this event. In these days of uneven consciousness on our national and even global scene, it is so good to have sane people helping the cause and move things forward for our public lands, our natural resource management, and we've got some of the leaders of that cause here today. So without further ado, I'm going to do a double introduction, and I'm going to welcome up here both Senator Hickenlooper and Congressman Neguse in that order, and they're going to chat with you about what they're doing to help keep all this precious stuff in great shape for us for now and in the future. Senator Hickenlooper.
And when Gary came out to greet me, it is impossible for me to come back to Estes Park and not revisit the fall of 2013 when we had that unbelievable flood. And this entire community rallied in a way that was a national model. It was reported nationally that this whole valley stood together. And we got the National Park Service to allow that. Remember, there was a government shutdown. That was right when the leaves were changing. All the businesses had killed themselves to get the mud and the gravel wiped out of their stores. And then all of a sudden they're going to close the park. Literally, that next Monday, we were up here on Friday and we walked through in the store. The town was ready to open, which was a miracle. And we called Sally Jewell, not say it was Sally Jewell, and she was in her office at 6:30 on a Friday night. By noon the next day, she had okayed that the state of Colorado actually paid the salaries for every employee in Rocky Mountain National Park so they could open. That's the way the state government and the federal government used to work together around public lands. And I think it's worth revisiting that it was a team effort, that everyone was on the same page, and the businesses desperately needed that retail period to be open to maximize the largest influx of visitors to Estes Park, and we got it. It was a little short than a master plan in modeling. We don't have that right now. We're here in one of the most beautiful places in Colorado, I think one of the most beautiful places in the world. And we cherish these places. 80% of Americans believe that we have to protect our national parks, that they are places that deserve to be cherished. We've got $17 billion worth of revenue in the outdoor recreation industry just in Colorado. $640 billion nationally. These are enormous numbers that are tied to the majesty of these lands. And I think those lands are under siege. Between what DOGE has done, the firings, if you add the people in the Forest Service and national parks and basically take the Department of the Interior and all the different components of the people that take care of our forests and our national parks, you're talking over 6,000 people have been either fired or have left their jobs, have been pushed out of their jobs. It's ridiculous at a time when we're just getting ready for what should be one of the great summer seasons, spring, summer, fall seasons, because outdoor rec is becoming a 12 season. Now I'm going to work that into my remarks. At the same time, the president's budget included selling public lands, taking smaller national parks and turning them over to states to run as they see fit. I'm a great believer that states are laboratories of democracy, and we should look at things like that. But you don't try an experiment in a helter-skelter way just off an impulse. We're going to see more risk this summer and this spring from wildfires, from extreme weather. We're going to see more risk than we've seen before in all manner of aspects of the droughts we've had and the water we have to use at a time when we're dramatically diminishing the number of firefighters we're going to have available to fight fires in the West. This is something people go through, and a lot of Americans are thinking, we're cutting some more here, cutting some more there. government was too big, this is a good thing. But the old question is, when are you cutting the fat and when are you cutting the bone and the muscle? And this is the muscle of what we need to have our successful outdoor recreation industry. President Trump declared a national energy emergency, which, as somebody I spent a lot of time around energy over my life in all different aspects. You know, back when I got my master's in geology, we called it the greenhouse effect. We didn't call it climate change. That's how long I've been at this battle and arguing that this is something we have to have a huge sense of urgency about. We've got to, everyone, be trying to figure out everything we can do every day, everywhere, to address climate change. And suddenly we're told we should take a pause, that this isn't, there's no urgency, we can drill, baby, drill, and that will allow us that lower price of natural gas and oil, and now they want to put coal back into the combustion. It boggles the mind. I guess I'll close. I'll give you the broad view, and then we'll let Congressman Neguse give you the hard punches. What we need to do is begin using social media like we've never used it before. And the person I think about, you know, the second most famous general in the Revolutionary War, who was it? Second, not George Washington, who was second? A guy named Nathaniel Greene. And he was a general in the South, so he was a general, the colonials, he led the colonial troops in North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia, where the British had overwhelming support. And what Nathaniel Greene did was, he said, we fight, we're beaten, we rise and fight again. We fight, we're beaten, we rise and fight again. And that's what we're doing right now, is we are being attacked from every direction, especially in climate change, and we don't have a strong hand, right? They control the White House, both houses of Congress, they control the Supreme Court. We fight, and even when we lose, we rise and fight again. And that's what you're all here, and one way to do that is to make sure we begin using social media much more powerfully than we ever have, and we make sure that our networks of people tell their networks of people what this really means, what this could do when you cripple an outdoor recreation economy that is actually paying for the maintenance, the preservation, and the access to these incredible public lands. It's going to be a battle that we're going to lose a bunch of battles on this thing, but I think as we fight and rise again, we're going to win, because that's what this country's built on. Now I'm going to introduce a man who needs no introduction. I should not have gone first. I am proud to be a senator, but I also recognize when I'm in someone's territory who really owns this space. No one knows this area better, no politician knows this better than Joe Neguse.
Well, good morning. It's wonderful to be back here in Estes Park. First, let me just say a word about our senator, our former governor, Senator Hickenlooper, and I'll embarrass him a bit, but as we walked in, Mayor Hall so kindly said to him, "You're a hero up here in Estes Park," because 13 years ago, 12 years ago, during the historic floods that this community grappled with, our then governor, John Hickenlooper, stood for this community when the community needed him the most. And we are grateful to the senator for all of his work over the course of many years serving our great state and helping our communities when we need help the most. And of course, it's what brings us to Estes Park today, because this community, this area needs our help today now more than ever. I will say it's great to be back in Estes Park for a lot of different reasons. Estes Park holds a special place in my heart. Some of my most fondest memories growing up in Colorado, being up here in Rocky Mountain National Park with my dad hiking many, many years ago when I was a young man. I proposed to my wife, actually, just 2 miles from here, or less than 2 miles, right outside of this lake. She said yes, but this was 13 years ago. So in any event, Estes Park holds a special place in my heart, but it's also just great to be back home in Colorado. As the senator knows, we spent last week in Washington, D.C., and in the House, we spent the week engulfed in debate on the House Republicans' what I believe reckless reconciliation bill, which included a marathon 22-hour hearing before the Rules Committee on which I serve, which is in a windowless room in Washington, D.C. So you could imagine just how wonderful it feels to be back here in Estes Park, in an area that, as the senator so aptly put, I think is one of the most beautiful landscapes in the world, let alone the United States. But of course, the reason we're here, gathered with the mayor of Lyons, with county commissioners from Larimer County and Gilpin County and others who have joined us, is because we all are deeply alarmed by what has happened in our land management agencies, at the BLM, at the Forest Service, at the National Park Service, and ultimately across the federal government, as tragically this administration has taken a sledgehammer to the federal workforce, to the civil servants who each and every day serve our communities, serve our state, serve our country in protecting and preserving these treasured landscapes that are part of who we are as Coloradans. And there is no better example of that than here in Estes Park, where you have individuals who were employed by the Forest Service, employed by the National Park Service, who have been unceremoniously purged from the federal workforce. I know the senator has heard the same stories I have heard from countless individuals with the Route National Forest and the White River National Forest, the Arapahoe Roosevelt National Forest, who have given their careers, their lives in service of these treasured public lands, and now to be unceremoniously dispatched from these agencies, putting at great risk not just, of course, our ability to preserve and protect these landscapes, but ultimately our livelihoods and the safety of our communities. The cuts that have been made thus far are reckless, they are short-sighted, and they do not put safety first. And one can think of no better example, in my view, than just a few short years ago when we were all here. Our next speaker, I remember visiting with her so well 5 years ago during the Cameron Peak fire. I remember that fire as though it were yesterday. Many of you in Estes Park, of course, remember it well, when multiple access points out of this community were closed. And we weren't sure, as that fire was metastasizing over the ridge here from the west, whether it would ultimately hit Estes Park. Countless folks employed by the National Park Service, by the Arapahoe Roosevelt National Forest, stood up and protected this community when it needed them the most. And to think that now those same individuals are being terminated by the Trump administration, again, I just can't think of anything more short-sighted. So we're here because there's something we can do about it. Senator Hickenlooper is leading the charge in the Senate with two bills, the Save Our Forests Act and Save Our Parks Act. These are common sense, prudent measures that would simply reinstate these civil servants in the agencies for which they were once employed. The bills, which I know he's built a coalition in the Senate, Senator Kelly and others in support of, I think would do wonders to getting our public lands preservation work back on track. And I'm proud to co-lead those bills in the House. But as he said, we're going to have to build a drumbeat in support of these measures to make the case to our colleagues in Washington, many of whom come from the Eastern Seaboard and perhaps aren't as familiar with just how important this work is back here in the West. I believe that we'll be able to make the case to them. And for those who doubt it, I'll just give you one example. The senator mentioned the sale of our public lands and the efforts by some in Washington to try to sell off our public lands to the highest bidder. The reconciliation bill that I referenced, which is now on its way to the United States Senate, passed last week on a party line vote in the House. Originally in that bill, there was a measure to sell off hundreds of thousands of acres of public lands from Utah and Nevada. This was a measure that was snuck in at midnight, literally, the 11th hour, as part of our natural resources legislative deliberations. And because of our exposure of that measure, of exposing it to some sunlight and the outcry that was vociferous from many of you and so many others, that measure was ultimately pulled out of the bill before it made its way to the House floor. So we have the ability, I don't want us to fall into this temptation of believing that we don't have the capacity to change outcomes here, to change the course of events. As the senator so eloquently put it, we can and we will, but it's going to take all of us leaning in together. And we could not be more grateful to have someone in that work, in that fight, whom literally has given her career to the preservation of our public lands. She worked closely with Senator Hickenlooper, Governor Hickenlooper. I was privileged to be able to work with her often when she was superintendent of Rocky Mountain National Park. She served for 30 years as part of our National Park Service. And I believe her record speaks for itself as one of the best land management officials in the United States. So we're so grateful to have her here to talk a bit more about the work that brings us all together. She's someone that needs no introduction to this community, Darla Siles. So a round of applause to Darla.
I can barely see over this podium. It's very, very tall. Well, thank you for that very generous introduction, and I'm very honored to be here with you all today to talk a little bit about the impacts to the National Park Service. As was mentioned, I had a long career in the federal government. Actually, my first few assignments were with the National Forest Service, and then I also worked with the Bureau of Land Management in Utah. And the last 20 years or so, I had superintendent or deputy superintendent positions with the National Park Service. So it's a long and storied career. And I just have to say, my basic message here today, what I really want to emphasize, is that the National Park Service has always had challenging times. But I've never seen anything like we're seeing today in terms of the challenges that parks across the entire country are seeing. In a 109-year history, none of those challenges were even remotely as challenging as they are today. You all know that America's national parks are for everyone, all Americans, all to come here and enjoy, to care for and protect. And national parks aren't blue. National parks are not red. National parks are for everyone. They transcend political boundaries. So I think it's important to keep that in mind today. Our national parks have often been called America's greatest idea, and they have historically always enjoyed bipartisan support. But today, national parks and all federal public lands especially are facing unprecedented threats and challenges. Yes, we have had challenges in the past. Certainly, budgets have been going down for quite some time. Staffing has been going down for quite some time. But at the same time, visitation continues to increase, right? But this time is different. There's been a dramatic downturn, as both of our speakers have said. Thousands of staff have left across the country. There's huge gaps in the workforce now. And you might hear about that a lot of those gaps are Washington office positions and regional office positions, but those positions are also impacting the parks. Parks are being impacted now. Employees are leaving, and there are more RIFs. There's an acronym. Reductions in force that are expected soon. On top of all those thousands of positions, the proposed budget calls for a $1.2 billion decrease for the National Park Service. That's just the National Park Service. That number equates to nearly 40% of the agency's funding. So that's not cutting fat, and I will make one exception to what I heard earlier, cutting into the muscle. I don't know that there's a lot of muscle left. I think it's cutting into the bone, actually. So a few of those direct impacts that the parks are seeing across the country, these reductions in force and the proposed reorganizations are causing an incredible amount of stress and anxiety amongst the national park and amongst the public lands management staff. Behind the scenes, morale is low. On the surface, you will always see people doing their best and trying their hardest. So you won't see it on the surface to the average visitor, but believe me, they are struggling. Many staff day in and day out are worried about whether they're going to have a job tomorrow. Many of those employees live in the national parks. If they lose their jobs, they also lose their housing. Thousands of staff have taken these buyouts or early retirements, and many of the people that did that did so because they were afraid they were going to be fired. They've been living in a climate of fear and stress, and they felt like they needed to take action and have control over their future. And as I mentioned, a lot of people will say, well, the target right now is Washington and regional offices. And in terms of the numbers of staff that have left, there have been more Washington and regional staff leaving. However, that impacts parks dramatically. So what happens is these positions that are vacant also can't be filled because there's a hiring freeze going on. And so they're providing, these positions provided critical support to parks, but they can't be filled. A lot of those positions were leadership and technical positions. For example, contracting positions, helping parks with contracting, with projects, project management. Our National Park Service's natural and cultural resource technical specialists. These are people the parks can't do without. Wildlife management, vegetation management, ecosystem management, fire management, veterinary specialists that help when parks have issues with wildlife. So this ongoing hiring freeze is impacting parks also because those parks are still having to do the work. The work did not go away. So people are taking on more and more. Many are doing 2, 3 more positions, more work than they've ever done before. And a lot of that work is work that is unfamiliar to them, that they don't have the training for, that they don't have the knowledge for. And that's where some of our safety concerns come in. With the order to make parks look like they are functioning normally, Park Service staff are doing more and more with less. They were doing that before this, and now they are feeling like they are absolutely stretched. So one example I'll give you, I've heard numerous examples across the National Park Service. Interpretation staff, resource management staff are cleaning restrooms because they don't have the staff to be able to do that. That's just one example. The specific jobs for which these people were hired, because they're trying to take on so much other work, is being compromised and diluted. They're not able to function in their jobs as they should. And you are all familiar with the incident command teams. Certainly here in Colorado, everyone is familiar with those folks. They are the ones that respond to national wildland fires and national disasters. These teams are made up of people that work in parks, in forests, on public lands, and they have collateral duties that travel around on these teams. A lot of those people have taken the buyouts. So that means these teams are going to have a lot less expertise, and they won't be able to fill those positions. That is not going to bode well for wildfire and emergency management response. So all of this, the reductions in force, the dramatic proposed budget cuts, all of this is truly the opposite of efficiency. But what about the average visitor to a national park this summer? I don't think you're going to see a standard visit, because each of the national parks have different things going on. They've had different staff leave. They have different capabilities. So in some cases, the public may not notice anything different on the surface. And that's because the National Park Service staff are working their butts off to continue to provide that great experience for visitors. They want the visitors to have a great experience. These folks are some of the hardest working, most dedicated staff you will ever find. They are passionate about what they do. They are not the lazy government workers that you've heard about. This is not them. Behind the scenes, the staff are truly struggling. They're stretched to their breaking point, and a result of the edict to make parks look like they are functioning normal for visitors. As a result, the natural and cultural resources, park projects, infrastructure, historic buildings. A lot of national parks are based on our nation's history. A lot of those buildings are who we are as America. They tell the story of our heritage. Those are increasingly going to be overlooked, underfunded, and shortchanged. And if those proposed budget cuts go forward, what could be nearly a 40% budget cut, future park management will be unsustainable. And I say easily disastrous. So in closing, the idea of preserving a nation's historical, natural, and cultural heritage and making these places accessible to all has always united people across all the political spectrums. So now is the time to be informed and engaged and to stay informed about what's happening in the national parks and across our public lands, and to stand up and support national parks. Thanks y'all for being here.
I have to mention a couple things about Darla. She still, I think, holds the title of the only female superintendent of Rocky Mountain National Park. And so those 7 years that she was there, we loved having her here. She epitomizes the spirit, the heart, and the intelligence that you need, and which we seem to be lacking at other places in our government these days. And she took care of the park through COVID, through the closure at the time, through the fires as it leaped over the divide. And then there's another person who's going to speak to you now who, once all of that stuff starts hitting the fan, who takes care of everything. I worked at the hospital during the time that we had those various disasters. And so I got to know the following speaker 24/7 for long periods of time in there. So the director of the Office of Emergency Management from Larimer County, my good friend Lori Hodges.
I'm short too. All right. All right, I'm going to stand on my tiptoes. Thank you guys for having me here. I really appreciate it. I was actually hired here in Larimer County after the 2012 High Park fire and the 2013 flood to manage those the recovery of those disasters, and then to also build an emergency management program. Emergency management is really more about responding to crises. It's about understanding and addressing the far-reaching consequences of those events. Every day we work to manage not just the immediate risk, the immediate impact, but the cascading impacts and the consequences that occur from these events, especially when those events touch our natural lands. So today I wanted to focus really on those cascading impacts. Probably what you don't see is with actions that are taken, what happens from those actions, and some of the growing concerns we face as support systems shift and our critical programs are disrupted. First, I'd like to highlight successes that we've had with fire mitigation activities here in Larimer County. After the 2012 High Park fire and the Cameron Peak fire, we were able to upgrade culverts, we were able to upgrade bridges, which then for post-fire flooding, we didn't have those impacts that we would have had in those specific communities. So that is a success that we've had from mitigation programs and from federal funding that we've received to do mitigation in this area. These projects, many of which were carried out on public lands, have made our communities more resilient. However, we're seeing a concerning shift in focus from prevention and mitigation to response alone. One clear example is the cancellation of the BRIC program, which is the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities grant program through FEMA. That provided vital funding to strengthen our infrastructure like bridges and culverts against those impacts of post-fire flooding. Without that support, we're much more vulnerable. Second, the staffing shortages, which has been mentioned previously on public lands, whether due to job uncertainty or disruption, those pose major risks to us. These shortages impact not only our ability to mount an effective wildfire response, but also to deploy those incident management teams, as was mentioned previously. Also, one of those impacts is the timely processing of FEMA disaster declarations and reimbursements, which impact local budgets and also impacts our ability to rebuild after a disaster. And then the third impact is the everyday prevention efforts. So a lot of people don't think about those folks that are on our public lands who find those unattended campfires, the people who maintain the trails for safety of our community. Any of that left unaddressed will create a heavier burden on local government and also create a safety concern. Third, I'm concerned about the lack of a notice of funding opportunity for the EMPG grant, the Emergency Management Performance Grant. A lot of people don't know, but that grant really funds emergency management programs throughout the entire nation. So without that funding, many of these programs might not exist at all because the local governments won't have the funding to be able to keep those programs going. Without those programs, along with the expertise and the capacity that they bring, those programs might disappear completely. That includes the very people and the systems we rely on for mitigation, response, and recovery after disasters. Each of these changes, whether it's the loss of funding, staff shortages, or program cancellations, it sets off that ripple effect, that cascade that I talked about, that reaches far beyond today. They affect not only how we respond to emergencies now, but how we'll be able to protect our communities for future generations. To truly safeguard our public lands and the people who live or near or enjoy them, we need to treat these systems as if they're interconnected. And strengthening one part means strengthening the whole and reducing that risk to everyone. So thank you again for having me here. I really appreciate it.
Oh, you will need your phone.
Yeah.
Yes. We have one other speaker today, and in addition to those who took care of our national parks or take care of them and who help solve the crises when the crises come, we have the long-term preservation aspects. And so from the National Parks Conservation Association, my friend Tracy Coppola.
Thank you. Thank you. I was saying it just gets shorter and shorter. All right, well, you're good?
Just a little, yeah.
All right.
If we can get it down there like that.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everyone. I've been reflecting a lot the past few days about the National Park Service as America's storyteller. Every single national park unit, whether it's big or small, it holds the promise of telling our full story and where we can learn and reflect and build alliances. And this is the really exciting stuff about parks that is in my heart now and forever. It's where we can hold space for and honor each other. And as Darla was saying, national parks are not partisan. These are irreplaceable sites. They were designated by Congress with bills introduced and supported by members of both sides of the political aisle and by presidents from both parties. And these places are not islands. As was said before, this interconnectivity, these are living landscapes that they're directly connected to our gateway communities, our national heritage areas like the Cache-Laputa National Heritage Area, our Forest Service, our BLM, Fish and Wildlife Service. The health of our parks depends on the health of these entities. National parks are more popular than ever before. The Park Service just reported the highest visitation in its history, more than 331 million visits in 2024. And in Rocky, that number was well over 4 million, one of the highest in the nation. National parks are one of the country's best investments. The entire Park Service makes up a tiny percentage of our federal budget, just less than 1/15 of 1%. But parks generate billions of dollars for local economies and create thousands of jobs. In 2023, and that's the latest data available, 325 million park visitors spent an estimated $26.4 billion in local gateway regions while visiting park units across the country. It supported a total of 415,000 local jobs and $55.6 billion in economic output in the national economy. And Rocky is a massive part of this economic success. In 2023, 4.1 million park visitors spent an estimated $569 million in local gateway regions while visiting the park, supporting a total of 7,830 jobs. And protecting such a profitable national asset should be a no-brainer, but the administration continues to systematically dismantle the Park Service, freezing hiring, including 100 vacancies for park superintendents, forcing resignations, eliminating purchasing ability, canceling leases and banning travel. And with a major workforce reduction looming, the worst is yet to come. The Trump administration has triggered a full-blown staffing crisis at the Park Service, depleting it of nearly 13% of its staff so far, and that's a low estimate. We estimate as many as 2,500 park staff have been lost in a matter of months. It's likely much higher than that. And meanwhile, as Darla was saying, the president's recently proposed budget is the most extreme, damaging proposal our national parks have ever faced. It proposes to cut more than $1 billion to the National Park Service, including $900 million cut to the operation of national parks. And it could shutter more than 75% of the park system, essentially wiping out budgets and staffing for at least 350 park units. It isn't a budget cut, that is a demolition plan. And despite the dramatic reduction in staff, Interior Secretary Burgum recently issued a secretarial order to park managers to keep trails, campgrounds, and visitor centers open, even when they believe it's unmanageable. So it's clear that protecting parks is no longer the priority, but protecting appearances is. And Darla was reflecting on this too. To visitors, sometimes, depending where you are this year, it might look okay. It might seem okay. It's hard to tell. But I want to emphasize that that is a facade. Under the surface, the administration is forcing a skeleton crew to cobble together basic visitor services. And it's clear that the administration is prioritizing appearances over park resource protection and visitor safety. And I want to just say that instead of defending our park rangers and protecting park resources and all the benefits from our parks, this administration is siding with drilling and mining and attempts to sell off our public lands, as the senator and the congressman were reflecting on. The administration's vision for our national parks and public lands prioritizes mandatory oil and gas leasing, shrinking or erasing national monuments, and transferring public lands to states. So I am so thankful for the strong local support shown by gateway leaders across Colorado who have adopted pro-public lands resolutions and other actions for the town of Lyons, the Metro Mayor's Caucus, the Colorado State Legislature, and many other leaders, as well as the Colorado Public Lands Coalition. The Wilderness Society is here today, others. I really, really want to thank you for continuing to grow an army of voices that are standing up for keeping our public lands public. And of course, we're so thankful for Senator Hickenlooper, Congressman Neguse, for your leadership, your strong support for our national parks and our public lands. You don't need any convincing, but we all need to urge all members of Congress to reach out to Secretary Burgum to directly stop any reduction in force efforts, to lift the hiring freeze, to protect our national parks, to keep our public lands intact. And we urge the Senate to fight the recently passed House reconciliation bill that cuts $267 million from Park Service for staff funding while forcing more oil and gas leasing across our public lands. And finally, I'll say this. When the Trump administration tries to rewrite American history, it is the American people who will suffer the most. Secretary Burgum recently issued Secretarial Order 3431, instructing land managers to post signs asking visitors to report so-called negative information being shared at parks about past or living Americans. These signs could have a chilling effect on rangers just trying to do their job, just trying to tell the truth. I think of 2026, which is coming up soon. It marks our nation's 250th anniversary and Colorado's 150th. This is an opportunity and a call to action for us all. Many of us who are able to voice the truth, to highlight why parks are most important. They hold the promise of telling a fuller story of our country, one that makes us stronger and more resilient and more united. Thank you.
The parks indeed are the soul of America, and we need to keep them healthy. Thanks so much to our speakers. Senator Hickenlooper, do you have closing remarks for me?
No, I mean,
Okay,
thank you all for being here.
there you go.
Light the fires far and wide, make sure everybody hears them.
We are now going to open up for Q&A with the press.
Hi everyone, my name is Madeline Hughes. I'm the Deputy Press Secretary for the Senator. I'm just gonna have our speakers come up front. Thank you, and I'll have you all gather back here with me behind the podium. And then members of the press, if you have any questions, please raise your hand and we will start off. Fred, we'll start off with you.
Yeah, it's Fred Dreyer with Outside Magazine, and this question is for both the Congressman and the Senator. And I can let you go first.
Yeah, sure.
Exactly.
Let's hear the question first.
When you look at this,
when you look at the success of having the provision to sell that public land in Utah and Nevada taken out of the bill, what strategic lessons can be learned from that success that can be applied in both the House and the Senate?
Great question, and I guess I would say I identify two lessons for us that I suspect can be deployed effectively in the Senate as well. The first is that public feedback matters. I think, and I referenced this in some of my remarks earlier, there's this temptation for us to believe that our public institutions are impervious to public opinion and that they will simply ignore, the views of the American public. I don't believe that to be the case. I actually think that if enough citizens make their voices heard, and if the outcry builds to a sufficient crescendo, that you can potentially influence, as I said, the course of events in Washington, D.C. And this provision, there was a good example of that, in which the outcry was so strong over the course of really 2 to 3 weeks from when we exposed that measure. And that particular measure, the way in which it was introduced, was very surreptitious and I think kind of craven for a variety of different reasons. But in any event, it was clear that feedback loop worked. So that would be one. Second, and this speaks so well to, of course, the work that the Senator has done exceptionally well in the United States Senate, as he did as governor, is building a bipartisan coalition. Now, make no mistake, one of our speakers alluded to, the reconciliation bill includes very damaging provisions for our public lands. But in the case of that particular provision, there were a few Republican members of Congress, including Representative Zinke, former Interior Secretary, who stepped forward and, by virtue of a bipartisan coalition that had been established, were able to make the case, I believe privately, to Republican leadership that provision needed to be removed. So the combination of public pressure and us using the platform that the people of Colorado had bestowed upon us in the Congress, coupled with building a bipartisan coalition, I think proved to be very meaningful, and there's no one who's done that more effectively in the Senate, so Senator Hickenlooper can speak to that.
Well, I think someone who's done better than I is Joe Neguse, so let's be very clear who I am paying respects and adulation. What we saw there was, just as the Congressman said, widespread adoption of action. So people began using social media in a way many people hadn't done before. And it wasn't just the large nonprofits and membership organizations, it was grassroots from all sorts of different directions. And as often happens, it generated new points of view, new points of contention. I remember reading one day in my one of my platforms that the question was raised. This was about, the part that was in the bill originally was over 500,000 acres, most of it in Nevada, some of it in Utah, and the voice came out and said, it's BLM land that isn't it's not really very valuable for very many things, except maybe running a pipeline along if you're going to try and pull water out of Hoover Dam. The platform, the person on this platform said, where do we draw the line? When we start selling public lands, when we break that, or we allow that constitutional violation to occur, what's next? And boy, I heard Republicans and Democrats talking about that, and that caught fire and kind of rippled through the system. And that's what we've got to count on, the grassroots generating those ideas, those images, the right language that people will repeat. If I say something and no one takes it home and says it to their spouse, then I've touched a very small number of people. But if I say something stupid like light fires to make sure people hear about this, that'll go viral. Maybe not always such a good thing. But that's the key. You know, our news media, NBC, CBS, the national news media, no longer get any advertising from selling ads, right? They're solely dependent upon how many eyeballs they have and how long what's the level of attention? How long can they keep those eyeballs on screens? And what that means is politics has become entertainment. And we've got to figure out ways that things will be repeated so that we can spread the news about these legitimately catastrophic possibilities that are being talked about every day in Washington. And as we all know, what seems outlandish today, once they throw it out there, even if they withdraw it this time, it's in play. And the next time it won't seem quite as reckless or as dangerous. And in truth, the opposite is the reality. That it is even more dangerous when it becomes more acceptable.
Interesting. We have an opportunity here where this is such a unifying thing. National parks have always been unified, so that's an opportunity to actually bring people together. I think we've heard a lot about how we can do that, which I love to hear more about that. To really get the other side to hear how important this is by any means necessary. But what I'm concerned about is, like we were saying, keeping up appearances, and if those people who might be on the fence about it come to the national park, and behind the scenes the national park staff is just working their butt off to make it look like everything's okay. How can we, keep that message going that everything is not okay?
I'll just say as a context, so I had a brief time in college where I wanted to be a writer until my friends all told me that I sucked. There are real writers and there are not real writers. I was not a good enough writer to be real. But a guy named Franklin Reed came in Paul Horgan was actually who said this, came into class and he said, everything has been said, but not everything has been said superbly, and even if it had, everything must be said freshly again and again. We got to find fresh ways of saying this so people hear it like they haven't heard it before, because they're all going to, hopefully we'll get the grassroots and we'll rise up and fight again, and people will hear this, but then it's not going to be over. That we're going to need another wave and another wave, and that's the responsibility of all of us to keep the language alive.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with the senator. I would also just say that our public lands civil servants are incredibly resourceful, and as the former superintendent made clear, they are stressed and working around the clock to do everything they can to provide a world-class experience to visitors. All that being said, citizens across the country are going to see very firsthand and in very visceral ways the consequences of these draconian cuts to the National Park Service and to the Forest Service. I don't think that there's nothing you can do to mask what is in effect, as the superintendent said, a potentially upwards of 40% cut to the National Park Service. There's just not, there's no sugarcoating that. And so I have no doubts. And we're already starting to hear from citizens in our state, and I know that's the case at other national parks. It's case dependent, as the superintendent referenced, depending upon the circumstances on the ground. But I don't think there's any doubt that the American people, as we prepare for the summer here, will understand full well the consequences of the Trump administration's approach.
Okay, we have time for one more question from Lindsay.
I wanted to ask about some of your guys' how your relationships with federal agencies have changed, and what the collaboration you might have had before toward like conservation and wildfire mitigation, how that's changing now under this administration.
Maybe Lori?
Well, I will say, in Larimer County, we have excellent relationships at state, local, and federal level. Our federal partnerships haven't really changed as far as how we're going to work with them. We're still going to respond to crises the same way we always have, and we're still going to show up for our community. I think with the staff shortages, obviously, we're going to have to do things differently. So we're just going to have to innovate. We're going to have to figure out new ways of solving complex problems.
I would just add, because the senator led a letter on this that him and I sent together to the GSA and to the Forest Service, but just by way of example in terms of one of the consequences. So DOGE threatened to cancel the leases of 20 different facilities across Colorado, largely our land management agencies. One of these was the headquarters of the Arapahoe Roosevelt National Forest out in Fort Collins, not that far from here. That location was initially the forward operating location for the Cameron Peak fire before they brought in the incident management teams. And so a real world example, right, of a cut that in our view is short-sighted and reckless and not in the best interest of the people of Larimer County, and isn't particularly partisan. This is just about protecting the folks up here who are also blessed to be able to call this area home. And so I think it's an example of that change in approach, but we're going to continue to hold their feet to the fire and make the case that the administration ought to reverse course.